History tells the story of the world and of our lives. Sometimes that history goes bump in the night. Broadcasting from the center of oddity and the supernatural in Central Florida, it's the History Goes Bump podcast.
Hello, you spooktacular people. Welcome to this 574th episode of the History Goes Bump podcast, Ghost Tours for the Theater of the Mind. I am your host, Diane.
And this is Kelly.
Kelly, on this episode, we're going to be going to New York City.
New York City!
To look at a location that was suggested by our listener, Marie Fisher. And this is the Merchant's House Museum. It's a one-of-a-kind place in Manhattan, which is another thing that we didn't get to see while we were there.
Dang it.
We didn't even know about it. If we had, we definitely would want to check it out. We're looking forward to sharing about the history and haunts of this place. Before we get into that, we want to welcome into the Spooktacular crew, Tim Kulig, who you guys hear a lot of his music here on this podcast.
Yes.
And Tim actually did an interview with me, which will be coming up in March, so I'll let everybody know a little bit more about that as we get closer to it. Courtney, who joined us on the last episode, and Nancy.
Thank you for joining the Spooktacular crew.
And now, this moment in oddity.
The moment in oddity was suggested by Jared Rang. In terms of spiders, jumping spiders tend to be the cutest, at least in our opinion. There are many videos out there of peacock sparkle muffin jumping spiders going through their breeding dances. They look like they're waving at the camera along with other antics. Back in August of 2022, there was a study published by Harvard that revealed that jumping spiders just may dream. The researchers analyzed 34 juvenile jumping spiders. Due to the spiders' young age, their exoskeletons were translucent. Using an infrared camera, the jumping spiders were observed in a REM dreamlike state, showing the same types of characteristics found in humans and other mammals. The behaviors exhibited were limb movements, like leg twitching and curling. It is believed that this is the first study of its kind performed on terrestrial invertebrates. What ultimately led to this study seems somewhat happenstance. There is a European jumping spider that hangs from a silk thread while sleeping at night. The researchers happened to notice how the spiders would twitch and move almost like dreaming. They waited for newly emerged babies to conduct their study due to the slings, another name for baby jumping spiders, translucency. While filming the young spiders, they were actually able to see that the retinas were moving at the same time as the other movements the spiders were displaying. Pondering the idea that creatures like jumping spiders actually dream is fascinating, but it also certainly is odd.
You're not afraid of a little ghost, are you?
And now this month in history.
In the month of February, on the 4th, in 1861, Apache Chief Cochise was arrested in Arizona by the U.S. Army for raiding a ranch. Cochise was a prominent leader of the Chiricahua Apache tribe, known as the Chokonen Band. A rancher's son had been kidnapped during an Apache raid, and the rancher, as well as the U.S. Army, accused Cochise and his people of the attack. It was later proven that the Coyotero Apache tribe were the ones who attacked and kidnapped the Arizona rancher's son. Lieutenant George Bascom was leading the confrontation of Chief Cochise prior to his arrest. Cochise was able to escape while being held captive in a tent. The Apache chief would not accept being unjustly imprisoned, and the arrest led to the long conflict known as the Apache Wars, which are often referred to as the Bascom Affair. Over a 10-year span, Cochise and his warriors heightened their attacks on American settlements. By 1872, the United States wanted the tensions and raids by Cochise to cease. The tribe was offered a large reservation in the southeastern portion of Arizona if the chief were to discontinue his warfare against the Americans. Chief Cochise conceded and said, "The white man and the Indian are to drink of the same water, eat of the same bread, and be at peace."
The Merchants House Museum at 29 East 4th Street in Manhattan is a relic from the past, making it a treasure in New York City. The house has stood for over 180 years and seen many changes to Manhattan. But one thing that hasn't changed is its interior. It's likely the only house in New York City with a fully preserved 19th century interior. There are those who claim that this is the most haunted house in Manhattan, and many of the spirits belong to the family who lived in the house for generations, the Treadwells. Join us as we explore the history and hauntings of the Merchants House Museum.
Street in Manhattan starts at Avenue D and continues to Broadway, where it becomes West 4th Street. There's a 4-block section from McDougal Street to University Place called Washington Square South, which forms the southern border of Washington Square Park. The museum is about 5 blocks down from Washington Square Park. This is also just outside of Greenwich Village, which we've done a podcast episode about, Haunted Greenwich Village. So this one was almost in that one, but it's just slightly outside of it. This is an area called NoHo, which is short for North of Houston Street, which means that Soho, which I'm more familiar with, I'd actually never heard of NoHo, must be south of Houston Street. NoHo has gone through 3 transitions, beginning as a residential neighborhood where the wealthy built their houses in the styles of Federal and Greek Revival. Many of the buildings here were made from cast iron to facilitate manufacturing in the 19th century as factories and warehouses were built, so that was its second iteration. And then in the 1960s, this brought an evolution as an artistic center that attracted artists and bohemians like Robert Mapplethorpe and Andy Warhol. Actors Sam Shepard and Edward Norton have lived here, and David Bowie lived here for a time as well.
Oh, wow. Hatter Joseph Brewster built his 4-story Federal-style brick house between 1831 and 1832. No one is sure who the architect was, but the National Park Service claims it was Menard Lefevre. Architectural historians believe that the house was only inspired by some of Lefevre's designs. The house is 3 bays across, with a raised basement, and is a typical row house from the 19th century. And iron railing lines the facade and leads up a short stairway leading to the front door that is framed by Ionic columns. The slate tile gable roof is steeply sloped, with 2 protruding dormer windows on the 4th story.
The interior featured 18 rooms, with the front door opening up into a square vestibule with a marble floor. The first story hosted the formal double parlors with mahogany doors. The basement had the kitchen, and there was a family space with fireplace that was used like a dining room. The kitchen had a built-in Dutch oven, dumbwaiter, stove, brick oven, and sink that got water from a backyard cistern. The stairs leading to the second floor had a door underneath that led to a tea room. The second floor and third floors had family bedrooms, and the top floor had the servant quarters. The interior has delicate plasterwork, which is endangered today because of a push to develop the land next to the house. This has been a battle that's been going on for many years. There's a way that you can help to preserve the house by going to the website and getting information to write to the city government. And the website is merchantshouse.org. The one side is kind of like an open area that almost looks like a parking lot, and there's like nothing there. I thought that's what they were going to try to develop, but a video that I watched indicated that there's a garage next door that they store some of the food trucks that come into the city, and that is what they want to redevelop. So number one, they're going to have to destroy that building, and then, any kind of vibration and stuff, they're just worried that this delicate plaster work that's inside the house that survived almost 200 years is not going to be able to handle the vibrations and such. There is sienna marble throughout on the floors and with the mantelpieces. Other floors were covered with moquette carpet. Moquette is a type of woven pile fabric in which cut or uncut threads form a short, dense cut or loop pile.
One of the unique features in the house is a secret passage. No one can ascertain when exactly it was built, so lots of legends have cropped up about it. These stories range from a way to sneak suitors into the house, to another way to reach the street, to a part of the Underground Railroad. The real reason is probably something boring, like it helped facilitate the maintenance of the sliding parlor doors. The second floor has 3 bedrooms coming off a long hallway that extends the entire length of the house. 2 of the bedrooms are considered master bedrooms and have Greek Revival-style doorways and windows with pilasters, lintels, architraves, and cornices. The 4-poster beds in both bedrooms are original. The children's rooms are on the 3rd floor, and the decor is much plainer. The 4th floor had 4 bedrooms for the servants. In the 1850s, a manually pulled elevator, supported by a rope and a winding mechanism, would be added between floors that carried Sarah Treadwell to her room.
Manually pulled, I'm already kind of sketchy about elevators. Especially, we were watching a reel last night, and it had the kids from Cobra Kai. And they must have gone on a show because they were all dressed up. And they were getting on an elevator, and they each had a way of stopping the door and making it open again so they could pop in. And they were using like their arms and their hands and their legs and their heads. And then I was looking at the comments underneath, and people are like, that's really stupid to do that. This woman lost her hand. And then I watched somebody get their arm chopped off, and another guy had his head chopped off. And I was like, what? Oh my God. I've never heard of such things happening. Now I'm like, I don't think I'll ever try to catch an elevator that way again. I had no idea that you could actually have that happen. And basically, an architrave is a beam that's resting directly on top of a capital or a column, or the molding around a doorway or window.
Okay.
I've never heard it called that fancy name before. If I could go back and redo my life again, I would definitely have gone into architecture because I've just come to love it so much. Joseph Brewster, that was the hatter. He came to New York City in 1814 and began his trade as hatter, and within 5 years, he had opened up 2 stores. So you can imagine how successful he was in New York City that he could have 2 stores there. His hattery business would become one of the largest in making hats. I wonder if he turned into a Mad Hatter.
Good grief.
Because he was successful, he was able to invest in real estate. He built several homes besides the house that would come to be known as the Merchant's House. He lived in it for 2 years, and the museum pays homage to him by displaying his portrait above the mantelpiece in the dining room. Brewster sold the house to Seabury Treadwell for $18,000. Seabury Treadwell was a hardware merchant and very successful. He was actually a direct descendant of Mayflower passengers.
Oh, goodness.
So he was an original here for sure. And when we say hardware merchant, in the early 1800s, hardware wasn't just tools and nails like we think about going to the hardware store. It was anything that was made out of metal. So it could be a coffee pot or a teapot, something like that. By 55, he had made his fortune, so he decided it was time to move his family into what was considered the suburbs of New York City. Can you imagine any part of Manhattan being considered the suburbs?
Not really.
Seabury had married Eliza Parker in 1820 when he was 40 years old. She was the daughter of his landlady and 23 years old. So when she came to get the rent check, did she bring the daughter along? And they both were like, oh.
Maybe.
And of course, it was a typical marriage of that time, kind of a May-December thing. They had 8 children. Elizabeth was born in 1821, Horace in 1823, Mary in 1825, Samuel in 1827, Phoebe in 1829, Julia in 1833, Sarah in 1835, and Gertrude in 1840. But she wasn't with them when they moved into the house because she wasn't born yet. She's going to be born in the house. They also had 4 Irish servants that they moved into the house with them.
We don't often talk about the Irish servants these rich families in New England and New York employed. For the Treadwells, they changed out their staff every 10 years. The house's website describes their lives and work thus. The work of the servants was physically demanding, and their hours were long. They were on call 24 hours a day. They were expected to rise before dawn, and their work was not finished until after dark, with only 1 afternoon off per week. Each day, the servants climbed flights of stairs over and over, carrying heavy buckets of coal upstairs and ashes downstairs. Clean water up dirty water down. Clean clothes and linens up, dirty clothes and linens down. The servants washed and ironed and cleaned and cooked and dusted and scrubbed on their hands and knees, and only at day's end could they sew and mend their own clothes.
The 6 Treadwell girls attended an elite private female academy known as Mrs. O'Kill's Academy. This was one of the most elite private female academies at that time, and women came from as far as Ohio and Louisiana to attend. The Treadwell daughters would have been highly sought after by men because they stood to inherit their father's fortune, and they were high up in the New York social circles. The museum actually still has to this day some of the girls' dance cards in their archives.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. There are several playbills as well in their collection. Gertrude was the youngest daughter, and family lore holds that she had a gentleman caller named Lewis Walton. Lewis's father was a physician who had trained in England, so many people in America felt that his medical education was on a lower tier.
Oh.
The Walton family were Roman Catholics, while the Treadwells were staunch Episcopalians, so they didn't like Catholics. The Treadwells had servants from Ireland, and Lewis's mother was Irish, so one can only imagine what Seabury thought of this suitor of Gertrude's. So the couple never married. But Gertrude did mention him in a letter she wrote in 1924 to a nephew. It read, "You know, Dr. Walton had angina pectoris, but he lived for years with it. Strained himself climbing the Alps." That's a heck of a way to strain yourself. Gertrude had maintained that if she couldn't marry Lewis, she wouldn't marry at all, and she didn't. Neither did Lewis. Which kind of lends some credence to the calling it lore, that this probably really was a thing.
Right.
Lewis died in 1903 at the age of 63. A carte de visite, or as the French would pronounce it, will you do that, Kelly? You did it better than me.
Carte de visite.
There you go. Do you know what that is?
No.
I didn't know that that's the technical name for it, but you know those old pictures that we see that are photographs mounted on a piece of card?
Yes.
That's exactly what it is.
Oh, okay.
They actually found a picture like that of Lewis in Gertrude's possessions.
Aw.
So I have no doubt that this bit of family lore is actually true. And what's really sad is, why didn't they try to get married after her father passed away? Because there were quite a few years after her dad passes away before Lewis's passing that they could have gotten married.
Samuel married Mary Louisa Thorpe in 1849, and she would die in 1870. He married again in 1884 to Ella Williams. Despite this big family, only 6 direct descendants are alive today, and they all come from Samuel and Ella.
Isn't that amazing? They had 8 children, and there's only 6 descendants still alive,
Yeah.
and they come from just one of their children, and it's his second marriage.
Seabury died in 1865, and Eliza died in 1882. Her daughters, Elizabeth and Mary, had preceded her in death, and Horace would follow in 1885. He never married. 3 of the Treadwell daughters lived in the house together in their older years because they never married: Gertrude, Julia, and Phoebe. A tragic accident occurred on October 3rd, 1907, at 6 o'clock in the morning. Phoebe was making her way downstairs when she fell down the stairs, breaking her femur. She was 78 years old at the time, and it killed her.
Here's a little fun fact. Falls on stairs are the second most common cause of accidental death after car accidents.
Gertrude remained in the house until her death in 1933, and she did die in the house. A lot of the family members actually died in the house. The house then passed on to her niece, Lily Nichols, who decided to sell the contents at auction and then sell the house. A distant cousin named George Chapman purchased the house because of its historical value. He was afraid it was going to get lost. And he established a nonprofit organization to operate the house while he funded it for the next 25 years. Chapman died in 1959 and the house fell into disrepair. In 1962, the Decorators Club of New York City, which at the time was the oldest professional women's organization of interior designers in the country, decided they wanted to rescue the house as their next project, and they raised funds and began restoring the furnishings, carpets, and draperies. They got the house designated as a National Historic Landmark in 1966.
And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors.
Extensive structural repairs needed to be made in 1968, and so New York University architect Joseph Roberto was called in to help, and he and his wife Carol fell in love with the house. Roberto was supposed to just serve as an advisor, But he jumped in, and over the next 9 years, a full restoration of the house was completed, including all the beautiful ornamental plasterwork. Whenever possible, Roberto reused original materials. The museum reopened to the public in November 1979. In 1981, the interior of the Merchant's House was formally designated as a landmark by the City of New York, and part of the reason is because of the ornamental plasterwork. They offer guided tours and self-guided tours, and hold various events.
The museum features some cool collections. More than 100 pieces of Treadwell furniture dating between 1815 and 1880, almost all of New York City origin, grace the formal parlors and private family rooms, including a set of 12 chairs attributed to Duncan Phyfe, one of New York's finest cabinet makers. Lighting includes candle stands to argand oil lamps with crystal prisms to fancy gas chandeliers. The lighting Treadwell devices, numbering close to 70, represent a full range of 19th century lighting technology.
I love that.
Among the garments and accessories held in the collection are a remarkable group of 39 dresses worn by Treadwell women, ranging in style from 1815 to 1890.
Wow.
As well as hats, parasols, shawls, shoes, gloves, reticules, and fans. Do you know what a reticule is?
Well, I do because I can see you just pulled it up on the computer.
Because I didn't know either. It's a woman's drawstring handbag.
Very cool.
During my interview that I'm doing with Tim, he asked how I keep shows fresh and exciting. And I answered him because I'm always asking why or what. I want to know more. That's why we have our rabbit holes.
Right.
And so when I read something like that, I don't just go over it. I'm like, well, what is that? So hopefully a lot of our listeners do the same thing and are like, what is that? And then I answer it for them. Or maybe a lot of them are like, duh, I already knew that.
Inquiring minds.
Recently, the Merchant's House collaborated with 3D modeling firm Paleo West Archaeology to create an interactive 3D model of one of the 39 dresses in the Treadwell costume collection. The model allows the viewer to look at the dress from all angles and zoom in on details, and you can check that out on the website.
Very cool. They do ghost tours in the house, and staff and guests have all experienced unexplained things. Reports of paranormal happenings started all the way back in the 1930s when the house first opened as a museum. The spirits are thought to belong to Treadwell family members.
I have in my handy-dandy hand here the Haunted Greenwich Village book written by Tom Ogden that we picked up while we were there.
In your handy-dandy hand? What in the world? Did you have a beer before we started recording this morning?
My handy-dandy hand. I don't know what I was trying to say. In my hand, I am holding. As they walk through the house, museum guests sometimes have the sensation that an invisible presence is watching them, or they feel a specter as it passes by. A favorite area for ghostly encounters is the kitchen and throughout the rear of the house. White, wispy shafts of light have been captured on film in the back bedroom on the second floor. For some time in the 1950s, caretakers heard raps coming from inside the wall in one of the other bedrooms. You don't ever want to hear something from inside the wall. What's inside the wall?
Critters.
Could be. To this day, piano music is sometimes heard in the parlor, though no one is ever at the instrument's keyboard. Electrical equipment throughout the house will go on the fritz. The scent of unseen fresh flowers, violet toilet water. Well, I guess that's how they must have perfumed their bathrooms.
Like the poo-pourri?
Yeah, I guess.
Spray it?
And bread baking occasionally wafts in the air. Small objects tend to move or become lost, only to be found later in other parts of the house, and the dining room door sometimes opens on its own. Now and then the footsteps of 2 or 3 people, soft as those of small children, are heard running down an empty corridor or on the stairs. And museum staffers have seen the apparitions of servants, especially since their former living quarters on the 5th floor have been opened up to visitors. Seabury Treadwell himself is said to have turned up from time to time. Anthony Belhov is a museum board member and tour guide at the house. I was watching a video that they had up on Haunt TV. It's very good. I enjoyed it. He said on that, during some of the ghost tours, we've had people feel someone breathing on their neck and they turn around and no one's there. Some are tapped on the shoulder. Figures have been seen walking by in rooms that are empty. We don't know how well the Treadwells like having their house open to the public, but they seem to be accommodating us, and we like to think it's because they realize that with the public coming here, we can raise the funds to keep the house standing. He also added, the house has changed so little since that time. If Einstein's correct and time is not linear but just keeps happening, I like to think that sometimes we just bump into each other. They're still here living their lives using the objects that are still here in the house. And we're here at a different date, a different time. And sometimes we just overlap and we just bump into each other, which leads me to wonder, do they see us and think we're ghosts? They might not even see the people that are around, and they just might be still in their same time and place when they left it, so it's just very normal to them.
Interesting.
And I went, wow, that's exactly what I say when we look over and see that woman in a period dress, and we're like, is she seeing us over here in our jeans and t-shirt and wondering what are we wearing?
Scandalous.
It's kind of like The Others, that movie, The Others.
Yeah.
It's that same thought that these different groups of people are living in the house together thinking that the other one is the ghost.
The museum does a raffle every Christmas, and one of the raffle prizes several years ago was this beautiful crystal dish. Staff had placed the dish in the center of a table over the weekend, and a winner was coming to pick it up on Monday. When they came in Monday morning, they found the dish shattered in pieces on the floor. The museum had been closed all weekend, so they had no explanation as to how the dish could have become broken.
And if you think about it, I'm assuming since this is a raffle prize and it's crystal, that it's real crystal, those aren't easy to break. That takes some force throwing it on the floor.
I'm surprised the floor wasn't damaged.
Yeah, I would definitely think the floor would have been damaged. Eldest son, Horace Treadwell, is thought to be one of the spirits here. Roberta Belyalovich of Visitor Services tells the story about two men who came to do a self-guided tour one day. About 5 or 10 minutes after they came in, one of them came up the stairs and he said, "I saw Horace in the family room." Roberta asked him, "How did you know it was Horace?" And what I love is that she's just like, "How did you know it was Horace?" rather than being like, "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" And he showed me the book that had family pictures in the book, and he said, "This is the one. This is who I saw." Roberta asked the man to describe what Horace was doing or how he appeared, and he answered that he was dressed all in black and was carrying a top hat, and he was leaning on the mantelpiece. It was as if he was in mourning, and Horace appeared to be very sad.
Oh, wow.
So they were wondering if this dated back to when his dad Seabury had died, and they, obviously we know they held funerals and wakes in the formal parlor room, so that would have been where they would have been, and maybe this is just a...
residual.
Yeah.
Executive Director Margaret Halsey Gardner told the New York Times back in 1998, "Many visitors got a cold and creepy feeling in Gertrude's bedroom. For months, I just couldn't make it all the way up the stairs to turn the lights on in the morning. Finally, I told them, I come in peace, and we've been fine ever since." One of the craziest ghost stories is about Gertrude. Gertrude was the only Treadwell child born in the house, and she died in the house. So she lived in the house for nearly 100 years.
Yeah, she died when she was 93.
Wow. Despite her father leaving a substantial sum to his daughters, the money had run out by the time Gertrude died, and there were several mortgages on the house.
Yeah, because I think when I calculated it, he would have died when she was in her 30s, so she basically was living on whatever fortune he had for 70 years, so it's pretty tough to keep that for that amount of time.
She had left the house and probably didn't want to leave. Shortly after her death in 1933, the neighbors were all outside watching their children play. The kids had gotten pretty rowdy playing stickball right in front of the house, and suddenly the front door of the Treadwells' house opened, and a small elderly woman, wearing a brown dress, rushed out on the stoop and waved her arms as she yelled at the kids. She was very upset, and the kids were terrified. The old woman went back in the house, and the crazy thing is that all the neighbors witnessed this, and they knew Gertrude had passed away 2 weeks before and that no one should have been in the house. They all recognized her as Gertrude.
Can you believe that?
That's crazy.
I mean, talk about multiple people seeing a ghost and that she came out and interacted. This wasn't just some residual thing.
Get off my lawn!
Unless maybe she did come running out on the patio a lot and yelled at them. Although maybe she did come out on the porch a lot and yell at the kids. I don't know, but I was just like, whoa. You had to think they were like, what just happened over there? I bet those kids never played stickball in front of the house again.
Probably not. Very cool experience, though.
And then this is also from the Haunted Greenwich Village book. Jamie wandered into the immense double parlor, immediately noting that it was more than twice the size of the room he'd have to design. So this is a guy who's walking through and he's just trying to get a feel for what a 19th century house would look like. And I think it was for a stage production. He was going to make a set.
Oh, gotcha.
Upon more careful examination, he realized that they were 2 rooms connected by sliding doors, separating them into a front parlor and a rear sitting room that doubled as the formal dining room. And we've seen this in lots and lots of houses where they had the gentlemen and the women's parlors.
Yeah.
As Jamie reached the curved landing on the staircase leading up to the second floor, he couldn't help but notice the short, elderly woman wearing a long, light brown taffeta gown at the top of the stairs. So again, we have a brown dress. She must be a costume docent, Jamie thought. Great. Perhaps she could answer a few questions he had about the decor. As he reached the top step, Jamie caught a glimmer of the woman as she entered one of the front bedrooms. He hastened a step, turned into the room, and nothing. There was no one there. The room was filled with all the expected furnishings, the canopy bed, the nightstand, the mirror, the curtains, but the mysterious stranger, more than likely Gertrude, was gone. Jamie was not alone in what he encountered. People had been seeing the apparition of a woman at the house, presumed to be Gertrude, even before the museum opened. So
Wow.
she definitely seems to be the main one that's hanging out here.
Anthony remembers his first encounter with Gertrude, which took place in a rear bedroom on the second floor that contains the original bed that is believed Gertrude was born in.
Can you imagine? It's one thing to have the original furnishings, but she lived to be 93 and the bed she was born in is still in the house.
It's incredible.
It's just like, whoa.
Which seems strange to me because that niece had that estate sale to sell off all the furniture.
I think what must have happened, because I don't know about the timing for sure, is that the cousin heard about it before anything was done and was like,
Gotcha.
Whoa, full stop. What are you doing? I mean, there was these mortgages and everything, so clearly he must have had some money since he funded everything for 25 years, that he's like, no, I'll use my money. We'll get it taken care of. You're not going to lose all this stuff.
And thank goodness he stepped in.
Yeah, because like I said, this is a treasure because there's nothing like this.
Anthony was closing everything up for the evening, and he came into the room just to check on things, and everything was open with the lights on and windows open. He walked up the hallway to close up all the other rooms first, and when he returned to the back bedroom, the door was now closed. He thought it odd and opened the door and found the windows and shutters were closed and the lights were turned off. He would soon find that this room often has the doors and blinds opening and closing on their own. On this occasion, he was terrified and bolted out of the house. He didn't come into work the next day either. Gertrude is able to interact with all types of objects, according to the staff.
So she was just going around helping him close stuff up. She's like, why did he look in this room and not close it up? I guess I'll have to do it. There is a lady in white here, and staff believe she is the eldest daughter, Elizabeth. She's seen as a full-bodied apparition roaming the halls. Anthony saw her one day when he was preparing for an event. He said, the guest speaker and I were seated here on the main landing discussing what we were going to do. Something like, I'll say this and you'll say that, I'll introduce you, that sort of thing. I was seated right on the step, just like this, and she was seated here. And while we were talking, I noticed there was motion and a bit of a rustle up at the top of the staircase. And I was able to look past her right up to where the staircase bends around again. And there was a woman standing there leaning on the staircase, on the handrail, and looking down. In fact, I felt our eyes had actually connected. She was wearing a period dress. She looked absolutely solid. I could see her face very clearly. It was a beautiful face, almost heart-shaped. It must have been close to a minute, and then somebody from downstairs hollered up, Anthony, we're ready to open the house, and I looked down. Then I looked up the stairs again, and the mysterious woman had completely vanished.
Wow.
I just think it's incredible. He's like, yeah, we locked eyes on each other. Sturgis Paranormal has been granted unprecedented access to the museum for the purpose of an open-ended investigation that has lasted 17 years.
Oh, my word.
So this has basically become a paranormal experimentation place, really. And during the pandemic, they were able to leave equipment going 24/7 because nobody was really coming in and out of the house. Occasionally, a docent would come in to check things, but pretty much there was nobody in there, so they could record and find out what kind of activity was happening when people weren't there. And they did indeed catch weird light anomalies and orbs. And the one time he said it was kind of funny, they got all excited that they thought they'd caught a full-bodied apparition, and then they realized that they'd seen somebody come in on the front camera. So it was just a staff member.
Bummer.
They were like, dang it. The person who heads up Sturgis Paranormal is Dan Sturgis. And what had happened is I think he'd called to help them with tours or something. And then it came out that he was a paranormal investigator. Or maybe he just asked, could I come in and investigate? And they were like, oh, well, I guess we could kind of let him. Because clearly we've had ghost stories about this place from the moment that Gertrude died. And probably there was somebody haunting the house before that because everybody had died before her. He's conducted over 75 investigations at the house, and he shares some EVP that he captured at the museum on his website. And that website is SturgisParanormal.com. I'm going to play this first one, and then I'll tell you what he thinks is being said here.
That's a good question, sir.
I am not afraid.
They think that it's saying, I'm not afraid. It was pretty clear. I think you could hear that one pretty well. I'll play it one more time.
That's a good question, sir.
I am not afraid.
Here's a second one.
What's your fondest memory?
What you should have heard in there is while the investigator's talking, there's some bells in the background, which we're thinking might be servant bells going off. I'll play it again.
What's your fondest memory?
Here's a third one. See if you can hear what is being said in the EVP.
Can you tell us what your purpose was? What was your purpose here at the Treadwell's home?
Servant is what they're thinking was said. That one was pretty clear as well. I'll play it again.
Can you tell us what your purpose was? What was your purpose here at the Treadwell's home?
This one I don't know is as clear.
Do you forgive the man?
They think it's saying soul should be saved. I'll play it again.
Do you forgive the man?
And this one's a little bit hard to get as well. This is the final one.
Are you a working person? Are you a member of the family? Or are you someone working for the family?
Just going to tell me.
It's Dad walking around.
They think it's saying, I wish you hadn't told me about that. I'll play it one more time.
Are you a working person? Are you a member of the family? Or are you someone working for the family?
Just going to tell me.
It's Dad walking around.
Anthony said, the last time that I was truly terrified when something happened in the house was during one of our paranormal investigations with Dan Sturgis. I'd been taking things pretty much in stride and become quite used to the unexplainable things that seem to happen on an occasional basis here at the museum, but this one was disturbing. We were conducting an investigation and we were here in Mr. Treadwell's bedroom. It was night, it was dark, and there were about 5 of us in the room. It was the usual team, and we had a guest psychic joining us that night, and she said that she got the impression that someone wanted the lights turned off because the lights were disturbing someone. She asked, do you want the lights turned off? And suddenly this door right behind me slammed. I screamed like a little schoolgirl.
Oh. Hans Holzer visited the house 3 times, and he wrote about it in his book, Travel Guide to Haunted Houses. Quote, sometimes people who die in emotional traumatic ways remain trapped in that world and setting. They're so used to a place, they defend it and refuse to leave. The great love of Gertrude's life was denied, and she closed herself off in that house and didn't want to leave it, even in death. End quote. Holzer's fascination with the house prompted the Holzer Files to visit.
I watched about the first 9 minutes of it because we don't have that streaming service anymore to watch it. So that's what they had up on YouTube. And Cindy Kaz had been going through the house and just saying some of the impressions that she'd gotten from it. And I'm not sure where she was getting some of her stuff because she did get the feeling of a woman on the stairs and something that happened there. So she clearly was feeling what had happened to Phoebe. But then she also got the impression that there was a woman hanging up near the stairs as well. And I don't know of anybody who committed suicide in this house. So I'm not sure where that was coming from. And I don't know what kind of evidence they got. But it was interesting to get to see the inside of the house. And these stairways were very narrow. And they were all kind of on the same side of the house. And I guess we sometimes forget that row houses are very different than the mansions that we go in to visit because they're, narrow, long houses that kind of go back. So their stairways were very, very different. And a lot of people were perplexed why Phoebe went down the stairs like she did because the elevator was still there at the time. So they were like, why didn't she just take the elevator? The Merchant's House Museum really is a one-of-a-kind house in Manhattan. A family's love ensured its survival as a time capsule to the future. we get a great glimpse of what life was like in the 19th century and beyond. Are some of the family spirits still here? Is the Merchant's House Museum haunted? That is for you to decide. Well, I know we will never be back to New York City, but what a bummer that we didn't get to see this while we were there. There's a couple of things now on our list that were like, because we also had the Morris Jamel house that I was like, dang it, 2 houses we could have gone to see that would have been amazing.
Right.
If you guys have been to either of these, let us know. What were your impressions? Have you ever been there for a ghost tour? They do host them definitely in October, but I also saw that they had something they were doing here in February. So,
oh, nice.
They do ghost tours quite often.
I'm surprised they didn't take us there on that ghost tour that we did in Greenwich, when I got
hypothermia. Yeah, we were so worried about me freezing to death, and you were actually the one who got hypothermic. But that's because I was wearing all of my really heavy-duty stuff. I even had my lined pants on. I had wondered the same thing, especially because it's in the Greenwich Village book, but NoHo is just outside of Greenwich Village, so it's not technically in it.
Gotcha.
And I think it would have been, because didn't we end in Washington Square?
I believe so.
I think we did. So it was probably just a little bit past that we, he'd taken us to so many other places because it went. I mean, the reason you got hypothermic is we were in 20-degree weather for like 2.5 hours.
Yeah,
it was a long tour. I don't know if it was the typical one or if he just was like, since we were excited about it and there were only 4 of us, that he was like, oh, I'm going to show you all kinds of stuff. But yeah, so that's the only reason I think that he didn't take us down that way. We'd love you to take yourself over to our website at historygoesbump.com. And if you'd like to send us some feedback, you can do that at historygoesbump@gmail.com or any of our various social media. We love to get your comments. Please leave us a review if you are so inclined and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We did hear from Kyle, and he was a former Carter House tour guide. So he had listened to the recent Franklin Battlefield Redux that we did. Good morning. I was excited to wake up this morning to see that you were covering the Battle of Franklin. I grew up outside of Franklin and was a volunteer tour guide for the Carter House for many years. I'm also a reenactor that participated in many of the memorial marches and living histories in the area. My family was also one of the construction crews in the area. My tour guide brain started screaming at the history portion. The Carters had freed their slaves before the battle, but did have about 8 black farmhands and a cook. The cook, I've forgotten her name, cooked for the family for 40 years. The land was purchased in 1819 and the house was completed in 1828. There were Spencer repeating rifles on the field. 2 companies of the 65th Indiana Infantry had them. In the same brigade, John S. Casement's brigade, to be exact, was the 65th Illinois Infantry with 120 Henry repeating rifles, the forerunner of the Winchester rifle, the rifle that could be loaded on Sunday and fired all week.
Oh my!
Don't you love that? These terrors of the battlefield were placed together at a break in the Osage Orange abatis. An abatis is the forerunner of the barbed wire entanglements of World War I. In Williamson County, the Osage Orange is known as the bodark tree. It's a tough, thorny tree that the Native Americans would use to make their bows. And as you heard, we were talking about that a lot of the soldiers got caught up in it. It's like going through a briar patch, kind of. This being said, Confederates said it was so thick that we couldn't pull or cut our way through it. Brigadier General John Adams' brigade would attempt to go through this gap only to be slaughtered. 60% of Adams' brigade was killed or wounded, including Adams himself, who was one of the 4 generals laid out on the porch of the Carton. Remember, we had mentioned there were 4 generals back there, so that was one of them. As for the hauntings, I never experienced anything at Franklin. Other places, yes, but not Franklin. That being said, when I worked at the Carter House, we heard from older guides that you could hear a female voice believed to be Anne. She was a prankster and gave her older sister Mary fits. This is from Mary's diary. Their mother's name was also Mary, so it can get confusing when researching. I've never heard of the McGavics being seen, but I have heard from the tour guides there that on certain nights you can hear a piano playing in the second-floor room that the McGavics lived in while it was a hospital. A story from when the Carton was being renovated was that a painter that my granddaddy and daddy used pulled up to the house and saw a man dressed in a uniform, and their arm in a sling waved at him from the front porch. He pulled past the house and looked in the mirror, and the man was gone. He stayed in his truck until his partner showed up about 30 minutes later. He was like, is that a reenactor in costume? Nope. His partner pulled up and walked to his window. He said he must have still looked terrified because his partner asked, "You see him too?"
Oh my.
I have to say that the Tennessee Wraith Chasers is the reason I stopped watching paranormal reality shows. I can't tell you how sick I felt watching that live show. My mom all but tied me down so I wouldn't go up there and give them a piece of my mind.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you just never know with a lot of these paranormal shows. I kind of think that's why paranormal shows on TV have gone away, because a lot of people have just gotten tired of the
Over the
BS.
top, yeah.
The Most Terrifying Places episode was interesting because I was part of the reenactors that marched up Columbia Avenue.
Oh, how
Very
fun.
cool. I knew the owner and remembered him talking about the drum sounds that night. That's all I can remember. I can talk with a few people that lived in Carton before it became a museum and get their stories. All in all, love your show and love the episode. I'm just passionate about this battle and those sites because I feel that they're being misrepresented today. Stay spooky. Well, thank you for sharing that, Kyle.
Yeah, thanks.
Told him I'll be sure to share that with everybody because clearly somebody who lived there and actually worked as a tour guide knows a lot more than we do. A lot of what we get is just what we can find online or in books. So.
True.
And I was telling Tim when he was interviewing me, he says, you sometimes go to these places. Do you ever do a podcast from the locations? I'm like, we don't really do a podcast from the location, but we like to go and investigate because for us, a lot of the stuff that we see, we're just not sure about. And so we want to know, is this place really haunted? Is there really stuff going on? And we feel like we've built enough of a relationship up with you guys, our listeners, that when we say something has happened, you'll believe us because we're not going to make it up.
Right.
Because I'm just as doubtful and skeptical as most people. So even when stuff happens to me, I'm like, did that really happen?
Exactly.
We want to thank you guys for tuning into this episode. I've been your host, Diane.
And this has been Kelly.
You take care now.
Bye-bye.
This episode is brought to you by our executive producers.
I'd love to offer you my services in burial. Become an executive producer and we can hang out in the graveyard. You get a free sticker no matter what, and if you want to get rid of those pesky ads, it's just $2 a month. Check out the Support the Show tab on the website.
So spiders dream. Who would have thunk it?
Apparently they do. We can test this for ourselves once we get our own.
Which apparently we're going to be doing this weekend as we go out looking for a jumping spider.
Mort wants a baby jumping spider.
Cochise was a prominent leader of the Chiricahua Apache. It's the Apache tribe. Cochise was a prominent leader of the Chiricahua Apache. Why can't I say Apache? It's Apache.
Oh, golly. It's too early. You can have some of my coffee, darling.
4th Street in Manhattan starts at Avenue D and can... Avenue D.
As we always say Riley does with her silly tongue. When she hangs her tongue out of her face.
Tongue hangs out of her mouth. She looks like die.
But the National Park Service claims it was Menard Lefevre.
I got a fever. Boom, boom, boom.
In the morning.
Fever in the...
I don't remember.
Fever!
We
should take this act on the road.
No, we shouldn't. Please, no.
Other floors were covered with moquette carpet. Moquette is a type of woven...
Woven?
Woven. It's woven.
Woven. To a part of the Underground Railroad. Don't.
It always comes out as
railroad. Railroad. Holzer's